Hello everyone, my name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope that everyone has been safe, and I hope that you guys got a little bit of rest after we ended the stream last night, if you were able to join us for that long. For those that don't know, that we had a unanimous poll. 7 out of 8 people that are watching this last night ended up actually voting and in a poll that had us continue watching until we watched all the way through the Artemis 1 launch last night, which was pretty awesome. And we will do a recap tonight for those that were not present. Now, we come here and we do the news, pretty frequently, pretty much every other day, unless we have a little bit of a hiccup or I just simply can't because it'd be unsafe for me to drive to work the next day. But I do hope that you guys are still enjoying the content. And of course, we do this for a reason. And we do this because we want to be able to inform you about what's happening throughout the world. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. And a well-informed society is a society that is able to do great things. So I do hope that you guys continue to find this very informative. But one of the other reasons we do this, and the big reason we do this, is because we want to tell you what's happening going on about the world, so that way we can raise money to help people. 100% of everything we do here at the New News is charity driven. We don't make a single cent off of this. This isn't monetized. It never will be monetized. We will never be doing any kind of super chats during the live streams or anything like that. 100% of everything that we do is charity driven. We never want to profit off of other people's misery. We want to help people throughout the world. And you guys, as a community, let us be the news that gives back, which is our whole motto and our whole purpose. If you check out the video description below, you're going to see a ton of different organizations. They cover places, including many of which are for Ukraine, but other places throughout the world too, as we do cover global international news. And that includes places like the Horn of Africa, which has seen the worst drought in 40 years and has also seen untold misery thanks to terrorist organizations, piracy, and ongoing conflicts, many of which just recently ended, including the one in Ethiopia. We also have organizations for places in the United States and throughout the Americas, throughout Europe, throughout the entirety of the globe, throughout Southeast Asia, and many, many others. And if you have more, please continue to send them to us. You can get a hold of us. You can get a hold of me at my email, paul@thenewnews.net, or you can get a hold of a staff member on our Discord, or you can even give me a message on Twitter and let me know. I would love to be able to go through and vet more organizations. 80% or more of all of the organization, or all of the donations the organizations receive, 80% or more of those donations actually go to their programs, meaning they go to help people, which is why you may not see the usual programs such as the Red Cross. So please be sure to continue to give them your support. And if you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things you can do is help us grow our impact. The more people that come here and watch the news, and the more people that come and share this, the bigger of an impact we'll have. There'll be more people here to donate. There will be more attention to the situations ongoing throughout the world, and we can do some real good and help a lot of people through this project, and that's what we want to do. At some point, we want to be able to put a donation link on every single stream we do, so that while we're live, we can raise money, and we have the goal of, when we get to be able to do that, to raise $1 million to do that. That is just our first goal alone, and you guys are quickly on our way to helping us achieve that. I cannot believe how many of you have joined this program. It's been awesome to see and grow over these last very long few months. But with that over, we get ready to roll into the news. But before we do, if you're joining us live tonight, please be sure to ask questions and make comments. I will address all of the questions and comments I see come across the live chat. And that reason being, to give you a little bit of background on myself, I have a little bit of subject matter expertise, especially when it comes to conflicts and stuff. So I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I served as a corporal and an 0352 anti-tank missileman in 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, Weapons Company. And I deployed twice to the Middle East. My first deployment was between October of 2017 and March of 2018. I did 4.5 months in the country of Syria, operating with Operation Inherent Resolve and assisting Special Operations Forces and coalition forces from around the globe, including the Polish, the British, the French, the Italians, in some cases, and as well as, of course, our SDF, or Syrian Democratic Forces partners, which I worked very, very closely with and got to meet and befriend many of them. And we took the fight to the Islamic State and also to organizations such as the Wagner Group. My second deployment to the Middle East I did between October of 2019 and March of 2020. I was in charge of the anti-tank team attached to Easy Company 27 when they were acting as the crisis response company out of Kuwait. As a result, I was one of the 100 Marines that deployed to the Baghdad Embassy complex on New Year's of 2020 in response to the protests that attempted to overrun the U.S. Embassy. I was there for when General Qassam al-Soleimani was killed during a drone strike, and also there for the ongoing ballistic missile strikes that occurred afterwards across the country of Iraq and many of the other incidents. I oversaw all anti-arm operations around the Baghdad Embassy complex. I then, after was pulled out from Baghdad, I then went to Saudi Arabia, where I trained Saudi Arabian Marines preparing to deploy to Yemen. I am a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I am also a fully cross-trained machine gunner. I am a fully cross-trained rifleman. I am a partially cross-trained radio operator, and I am a combat lifesaver certified Marine, meaning I've received medical training above that of what a normal Marine would. So if you have any questions, especially when it comes to the tactical level, I was never trained in strategic level things, though I will pitch in here and there based off of my personal observations. But I am very good at being able to talk about things on the very small unit leadership and tactical level. That is where my expertise lie. Outside of that, I try to remain very well-rounded in my knowledge. I have a very vast interest in things such as geopolitics, history, human geography, and many, many other subjects, and I'm always interested in learning more. So please feel free to ask questions about that stuff. Regardless, I will answer them to the best of my ability, but I will not promise anything outside my expertise. And if I simply don't know an answer, I will say, and as such, I won't answer things. It would be many, many lifetimes to become a master in everything. So it's simply too long for me to be able to. But I will do my best. And regardless of subject matter expert or not, there is no substitute for you as a viewer. If you find something interesting, please go ahead and do your own research. And we've actually been able to assist with that. If you go to our website, which is also linked in the description, you go to our works daily maps in 2022. You can jump down to November and you can actually pick out today's map. We upload all of the maps to our website so that way you guys can go through here on the program and you can click on every link that we provide. If we have more information, other articles, or associated works that go along with it, you guys can click on any of these and you can start your research from there. Or if you want to go on your own, of course, we try and give you the tools to do that. So thank you very much for joining us. And now we get ready to move into the news itself. And of course, we start off with Ukraine, which has suffered very dearly under a set of attacks which have occurred over the last 24 hours. And those attacks mostly occurred yesterday, and the repercussions are really what we're looking at today. Mostly effects on energy infrastructure, which has already been hit multiple times. In fact, coming from Ukraine today, they were saying that 126 times has Ukrainian energy infrastructure been struck or attempted to be struck by Russian forces. At this point in the war, this is really a new phase of the war, and this comes as a result of the Russians just simply being unable to continue the battle on the ground. They simply have to try to overwhelm Ukraine's air defense systems and essentially try to plunge Ukraine into darkness and destroy what basic necessities are required to survive the very harsh winters of Ukraine, as we are here in Eastern Europe. And just for the same reason no one invades Russia in the wintertime, you don't invade Ukraine in the wintertime. You don't win that battle. And it's similarly very harsh winters here in Ukraine as it would be in Russia. And as a result, this damage to the energy infrastructure is very, very critical when it comes to the livelihoods of people throughout the world, or people throughout the year, and being able to survive that very harsh winter. We're start off over here. This is actually I'm going to try and pronounce this. So this is over at the Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant, which is over here. This is on the western part of Ukraine. I apologize for my pronunciation, by the way. I really do try, but I really am not good with pronunciation, and so I really do apologize. That goes for names as well. If I ever misread someone's name, I apologize as well. But there's a very critical situation here at the power plant. Due to power loss, the power plant here has had to shut down 2 of its nuclear reactors. That's halting all electricity delivery. And according to Rafael Grossi, who is the Director General, I believe, I can't remember, a Secretary General or Director General. Anyway, he's in charge of the International Atomic Energy Administration or Agency, which is IAEA. And he says, quote, "This is very concerning development. It shows the potential nuclear safety and security risks facing all of Ukraine's nuclear facilities during this terrible war." And we're getting that from IAEA.org on their official Twitter. Right now, it is relying on diesel generators. Most diesel backup generators only last from between 14 and 15 days. Of course, Nuclear asks, am I going to ignore the commander? So we have an ongoing joke here on the channel. Nuclear provides a quote from an individual that started off here as a private. He is a private in the Russian army. It is Private Conscriptovich, who, through battlefield commissions and just everyone in his command dying, has made it all the way up to Army Commander Conscriptovich. And Army Commander Conscriptovich says today, quote, "Russia has done nothing wrong in its history. We have never attacked anyone. The evil West pronounces this nonsense, not us." Yes, you pronounce this nonsense. And as we move on from this, so this is very obviously very critical. This is not the first nuclear power plant that has had to go into this kind of contingency. We also saw it out of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant down there in Enerhodar, which has had to multiple times now go into emergency shutdown and has had to run off of diesel generators. So that is actually something that has recently had to happen at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We reported on that as well. But now, as a result of these energy infrastructure attacks, these facilities do require outside electricity to run safely for long periods of time, and so as a result, the nuclear power plant is having to shut down its reactors to prevent a possible meltdown in the future should the situation worsen. We move up here into the northern part of the Rivne Oblast, which is right here along the border between Ukraine and Belarus. Ukraine and Belarus right now all have some of the highest tensions they've had since the beginning of the war, as Belarus still continues to ponder under the Lukashenko regime as to whether or not they're actually going to enter the war properly. So far, they've been used as a base and basically a staging ground and an invasion point by Russian forces, but no Belarusian forces properly have actually engaged Ukraine. That prospect continues to rise as Lukashenko's government continues to go both towards Russia and away from Russia, and kind of is teetering on the fence of entering the war. As a result, Ukraine has taken many defensive measures, bolstering much of its defenses. We do know that there are additional garrisons of Ukrainian troops here in the north to prevent a possible invasion and to deter a possible invasion by Lukashenko in the northern part of Ukraine to open that second front possibly back up. And we continue to see the reinforcement of these positions here today. Not only are they building a wall, but they're also ensuring that road crossings are impassable. And we can see that coming out here. This is from a border crossing point. You can see that it is not only is it mined, they destroyed the roadway here. And this is actually a tank ditch. The whole point is this is actually wide enough. This hole in the ground is actually wide enough that armored vehicles simply cannot pass over it. They simply will. They'll actually just fall into this hole and be unable to get out. Tank ditches are exceptionally good at this, and we see them bolstering their defensive positions in many ways. There's that tank ditch again from the elongated side. But we can see it here. They're also building up basic walls and defensive structures. You see HESCO barriers in here, which is what these things are. These are basically giant sandbags. They're extremely effective at stopping fire, though. In fact, it did stop my Osprey going into Syria. It actually caused it to crash because we bumped our nose into it. So, yes, they are very, very sturdy. This is what you see on FOBs in Afghanistan and in Iraq and in Syria, too. And it's a quick way of making defensive works. a very great construction material, believe it or not. And they have a manual. I have one. But we do see them continuing to build those defensive structures, and we see them also. You see these red signs everywhere with a skull and crossbones. You can see it very clearly here. And while I may not speak Ukrainian or Russian, I understand exactly what this means. That means mined. This area has also been heavily mined. Neither Ukraine nor Russia are parties to the Ottawa Convention, which bans the usage of self-igniting landmines, specifically anti-personnel mines, but basically any landmines in the world. Stuff that isn't remotely triggered by an individual observing it, which is why the U.S. still uses claymore mines, but you can't use them as self-triggering. And we see both sides using landmines very heavily. Unfortunately, the effects of landmines are very, very long lasting. Similar to the unexploded ordnance used throughout Ukraine, landmines continue to pose a problem and will continue to pose a problem for decades, if not centuries. In fact, much like there are areas of the Ardennes which are currently completely impassable or no-go zones even to EOD, just because of the immense amount of shelling and unexploded ordnance from that shelling during World War I. Places such as in Cambodia, Vietnam, and many other locations throughout the world where military operations have taken place, large amount of landmines still continue to plague civilian populations in those areas too, killing and injuring many people every single year. While those numbers are decreasing as those landmines do end up exploding, becoming no longer viable, and are corroding away, that doesn't mean that the danger still is imposed there. And unfortunately, a lot of people do lose their lives as a result of landmines from wars so long ago. But that's what we're seeing here, and we do continue to see them bolstering those defenses up there by Belarus. That allows us to come down here and into Kyiv. We have several different updates coming out of Kyiv today, 6 in total and 7 in the Oblast itself. And what we end up seeing is over here is Grain from Ukraine initiative. Ukraine is launching a brand new initiative within the Black Sea agreements at this point. This is in partnership with the UN's World Food Program, or WFP, and this is being spearheaded by Andriy Yermak, who's the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, as well as President Zelensky himself. And they partnered with the WFP in order to launch this new Grain from Ukraine, or GFU initiative. It's aiming at getting at least 10 ships per month out to go to very hard-hit humanitarian disaster and crises areas, such as places like Yemen and Ethiopia and other places throughout the world. And we can see that coming in here. So this is coming from Andriy Yermak himself. This is him posting that Grain from Ukraine initiative. Bravery feeds the planet. This is coming from Alexander Kuprakov, who is the Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine. And, of course, coming from the official Ministry of Infrastructure of Ukraine, they have also posted plenty of stuff about this. And, in fact, the first ship has already left the port. So, coming from this Grain from Ukraine, the first ship under this humanitarian program departed from the Odessa seaport, the Nordvind, loaded with 27,000 tons of Ukrainian grain, is on its way to Ethiopia. GFU program envisages sending up to 10 ships with Ukrainian grain every single month. Here you go, coming from the official Twitter of the Ministry of Infrastructure of Ukraine. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this short. It's 2 minutes of them doing an Overwatch. This is the loading of the Nordvind, which is, once again, that first ship to leave under that new initiative. Caffeine, welcome everybody, but welcome back, Caffeine. I haven't seen you for a while. He's talking about Caffeine's Apparently, he is a truck driver, and and he says it's the busy part of the year, so he's very tired. Yeah, I feel that. So while I am no longer in the Marine Corps, what I actually do is I'm actually a logistical coordinator, is the fancy term. It means that I am a dispatcher and a load planner. And it is the very busy year. It's the very busy time of year for me, and we're a little bit short-staffed at work right now, so I'm pulling a little bit of double duty. So I definitely feel you there, man. So pleasure to see you. I definitely feel you there, but of course I get to sit in the comfy chair, right? JL says, Paul, any ideas on what is the overall year-to-year situation when it comes to grain exports? I honestly don't know a whole lot. What I do know is that roughly 50%, the World Food Program estimates that roughly 50% of their stockpile actually comes from Ukrainian grain. And so that ought to tell you in a grand scheme of things about how big their exports are, because when it comes to humanitarian missions, usually usually it's a fraction of what is the actual export capacity of the country during a given year is actually goes to humanitarian aid. Unfortunately, humanitarian aid really doesn't take a whole lot of precedence. It's more of like kind of a backseat kind of thing. Most of this grain is going to the global market and ensuring that global market stability maintains, which is what is caused on top of inflation in many places, including the United States. Market instability within the grain and agricultural industry as a direct result of the war. It's one of the reasons why your food prices have jacked so far up, and the reason why you keep seeing it hit immediately after big news comes out about the Black Sea Initiative, whether Russia is trying to pull out of it or coming back into it. That means that less people are willing to invest in the market. It means that there is immediate repercussions, and financially, those things happen almost instantly. In fact, a good 50% or more of stock market trades are actually done via robots. So when they have things like key phrases that they're looking for, and so when they see that kind of thing, they instantly start selling stocks, and it just really screws with the economies of the world. So it's much more complicated than I understand. Obviously, I'm not a millionaire because I don't play the stock market like that, but it is a basic principle. And so Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe and really the breadbasket of the world in many ways, their export capacity is quite substantial in its size and scope, and this has definitely been a very bad year. And we will probably see where the repercussions will be will take several years to recover. You have to understand that right now, because there's a war going on, so not only is there occupied land right now with grain that has been stolen by the Russian Federation, who have openly admitted to it. In fact, governments were already talking about having to divvying up within several of the regions of Russia. We reported on that several months ago. But these regions, these fields are littered with munitions. I mean, take a look at some of the photos. It looks like the Battle of the Somme in many of these places, and that is the entire front line of Ukraine. That is anywhere that fighting is taking place. There's an immense amount of unexploded ordnance and areas that have been liberated for months, the majority of the year, really, since the war. Places like the Chernihiv and Sumy and Kyiv Oblast, where the fighting hasn't been ongoing there for more than 6 months. There's still a ton of ordnance that they are finding in these regions. That's where most of the demining efforts are ongoing, and that makes it very difficult to most of the fighting is in these big open fields where this grain is being grown, where these agricultural products are being grown. And as a result, it's very dangerous. These things are littered with landmines and unexploded munitions. And so every time a farmer is going out, he's possibly risking his life, because we've seen it multiple times now, where they'll be going down through one of these fields and they'll catch a landmine and it will kill the farmer and it will destroy the equipment and the harvest. And that will be decades. That will be decades ongoing. And not only that, but as a result of the war, a lot of the grain exports couldn't get out in time. And so a lot have rotted away. We've seen issues where there were issues trying to harvest because they couldn't get the grain out fast enough. So there's no place to put the newest harvest. So much of that will also end up, a lot of it, I wouldn't say the majority, but a lot of it will end up rotting just because it couldn't get out fast enough. And then also you have a lot of farmers that are fighting on the front lines in the war, or they've been killed, or they've been injured, and they can no longer continue in their career path. Or they're just still continuing to fight on the front lines, and that takes them away from being able to sow the winter crop of wheat, or being able to go out and harvest that crop of wheat, or being able to really do a lot of these things that they're supposed to be doing in their peaceful livelihoods. It's a complete disruption, and therefore it's a complete disruption for Ukraine. And as a result, being such a major agricultural industrialized country that supplies a large quantity of the world's food supply through agricultural products and exports, a disruption for Ukraine, a disruption for the entirety of Ukraine, therefore says a disruption for the entirety of the world. And we see those repercussions through a lot of things like collateral hunger, which we've talked about extensively here, and also shown several videos and explanations from the United Nations, the United Nations World Food Program. So I hope that answers your question, probably a little bit longer than you thought, but that is the situation there in Ukraine as best as I can explain it. We continue here. So we have the grain from Ukraine, and now we go to NAFO being back at it again. So as you may be able to tell, I'm a member of NAFO. I just wear the merch all the time and drink from the merch cup and all sorts of stuff. And I just think it's a really great initiative, and I think it's kind of funny. And also, this jacket is especially comfortable, and so is this beanie. I wear it all the time. But it's a good cause. I mean, it fights disinformation. They're very well known. They've gotten a lot of credibility from many, many different people, including many world leaders. And they've, ambassadors. I mean, even Alexei Reznikov, who is the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, the end-all, be-all when it comes to that. Except for the president of Ukraine, President Zelensky, and the general of the armed forces. I mean, he had his profile picture, a NAFO fella. Well, right now, NAFO has partnered with United 24, an initiative which we actually have in the video description below. And United 24 is doing a fundraiser right now for naval drones. Remember the drones that hit Sevastopol when we reported on it? Well, those same drones, Ukraine's looking to get more of them. And this is in conjuncture with, of course, NAFO. And now something I think that even though President Zelensky hasn't fully accepted it, there is a wonderful fellow which was given to United 24 wearing the United 24 shirt of President Zelensky, who now has his own fella. And that is coming from their official page here. If it would like to load. There we go. United 24. And there you guys go. The NAFO fundraiser for naval drones. And should you be a fella, and you should be, I honestly think, it's a good cause. Donate to the Georgian Legion, feed the wolves, guys. As you can see here, we are going to be getting a drone. And not only that, that's not the end-all be-all. Not only are you helping to support it, but you could possibly help name it, too. In fact, coming from NAFO, there's currently a raffle going on, a competition, if you will, that's being supported by none other than United 24 through the official NAFO Twitter. And we are currently having a competition. The top 4 names suggested here on Twitter, if you go to the NAFO Twitter here, if you suggest those at least 4 additional names, the top 4 names will be selected in the next 24 hours. After several days have gone by with those top 4 selections, those top 4 will then be boiled down to 1 in another poll. And at the end of that, that will be the name of whatever the drone will be, and that will be on that drone itself. And here are several of the top 4 of the top ones right now. We have DOC, also known as the Dildo of Consequences, which rarely comes lubed, by the way. while there was some talk about Ukraine not wanting to have that, the United 24 did come back and say these are not Hallmark cards. They do not have to be PG-13. We're just saying please think of all of the other things you could do. And of course, dildo of consequences, I do believe, is in the lead right now by quite a large margin. Another name for this is redacted. That's another one that is apparently popping up as pretty popular, or at least in one form or another, whether that's just the term itself or if it's going to be part of something, another larger thing. Bodie McBoatface, of course, and Fellowship, because it's the Fellowship of Ukraine. So that is currently what NATO or what NAFO is up to again. Of course, NAFO first came to very widespread popularity after crowdfunding a 2S7 Peon, a large artillery gun, a 203 millimeter artillery gun, which they named the Super Bunker 9000. So if you are interested, please go ahead and head over there and support United 24. Amazing endeavors anyway. They give you a wide range of options. You want to help rebuild, you want to provide humanitarian services, or you want to support the armed forces. It's run by the government of Ukraine, so you know exactly where the money's going. I highly recommend it, and I believe it's actually one of the very first ones that we have, if not the first one we have under the Ukraine section in the description below. So please go ahead and go and check them out. But I had to show the love there. Plus, I was reading through the names, and I could not stop laughing. Another great thing that has come out here, and that I wasn't aware of before, but I'm glad I am now. And I understand that occasionally there are Ukrainians that do come in here and do listen to the news. And I think if you don't have this app, or if you have friends or family in Ukraine that may not have this app, I think it's very important that they go and get it. This is an app. It's provided for free, and it's coming from the Ministry of the Interior, or of Internal Affairs of Ukraine. It's called the Mind Free Mobile Mine Safety app, and this was released prior, but I was just now becoming aware of it. And the reason I'm becoming aware of it is because it's had a very large recent update that was done after a large number of things that were suggested by users to make it better for them. And this is a great that they are listening to user feedback. So some of the things that this will actually do now, as this app it actually now has an interactive map that you can look at on your phone itself, on your device, and it will tell you exactly where known pieces of unexploded ordnance or landmines currently are at, so that way you don't end up putting yourself in danger as you're going out and walking about town or wherever you happen to be inside the country of Ukraine. This is known ordnance, of course. This is just stuff that has been found and hasn't been removed by EOD teams yet, because EOD teams, generally speaking, very short supply of them, not a whole lot of guys that are willing to do that job or are capable of doing it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of work for them to be doing right now. So high demand, low supply of VOD guys. So unfortunately, a lot of this stuff does take time to get removed, and sometimes quite extensively. But it will also give you an automatic alert if it detects that you are walking towards and getting near one of these danger zones. So that way you don't accidentally end up walking into it if you're not paying attention to the map on your phone. One of the other amazing things that this thing has is it actually tells you, it gives you a large number of resources regarding landmines and the types of landmines and unexploded ordnance that you may find out and about. All of the different types of landmines you may come across, or hand grenades, or unexploded ordnance, and stuff that it's danger, and it gives you photos and information about it. So that way, should you happen upon one that you may not have marked on the map yet, you'll be able to actually know what it is and what to safely do if you end up encountering such an item, on top of just calling your local EOD. So amazing resource. I highly recommend, especially considering the devastation of this war, that if you are Ukrainian, you get it. And we actually get this from the official Twitter of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Now it is in Ukrainian, but I think it's important. You can kind of get what she's talking about through the graphics. But here you guys go.
Застосунок змінної безпеки Mindfree покращено завдяки відгукам користувачів. Тепер швидше працює інформативна мапа. Застосунок дозволяє уникати мін та попереджає про наближення до вибухонебезпечних зон. Крім того, є можливість переглянути фото вибухонебезпечних предметів та сповістити ДСНС про їх виявлення. Для користування новими функціями застосунку потрібно оновити або завантажити його на Google Play та App Store.
And it's amazing that they're actually listening to them, and they're listening to the people that are out there and using this thing, and that they are making it better for them. And once again, it's an amazing way to deal with a problem that is very long lasting, and it's great that they are getting a resource out there that is capable of being just fit into your pocket. It's not something you have to remember. You can pull it out, you can see, you can look at it constantly, you can reference it all the time, and it will warn you if you aren't paying attention. So very happy to see that. I'm very happy to hear that they are taking those steps and taking a new approach to something that has been a long problem for a long time, especially using the newest technology with apps and what have you, because everyone in the world, regardless of where you're at, I swear has a cell phone. So it's awesome to see. Unfortunately, though, we do have dark and grim news too, and that's because we get another child casualty update. This is coming from the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine, of course, and this is the latest update. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 431 Ukrainian children have died, and 835 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region, and that is very true. The Donetsk region has seen some of those bitter fighting over the last 8 years, and some of the most, and especially brutal and bitter fighting over the past 8 months, since the Russian invasion began on February the 24th. The repairs on energy may take a long time. In fact, according to Kirill Tomashenko, who's the deputy head of the president's office, quote, resumption of the work of some Ukrainian energy facilities after massive Russian missile strikes on November 15th may take up to 2 weeks. This is energy infrastructure that does take significant time to be fixed, unfortunately. And as a result, unfortunately, a lot of people are going to be without power and necessary basic necessities that would normally be afforded to them under peaceful circumstances. Ukraine is targeting energy infrastructure primarily in and around big urban population centers and areas that are going to affect widespread civilian populations. Under Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conventions, which is additional protocol to the 1949 Geneva Conventions, the Protocol 1 was adopted in 1977. There is a way of differentiating between what is considered a valid military target and one that is a civilian target and is a war crime. The reason why Ukraine is declaring these a war crime is because they are. So it's based off of what is the primary function of the electrical system. And so the primary purpose of the electrical system for Kyiv and the primary purpose of the electrical system in Kharkiv and in Lviv is not for military infrastructure. It is to support large civilian populations. And if the primary usage of an item, even if it does have some military capacity, if the primary usage of such infrastructure is for the civilian population and would adversely affect the civilian population or create conditions which can no longer support life or create an exceptional hardship, then therefore it is considered to be a civilian target and therefore a war crime. Should the primary purpose of such infrastructure be for a military effort, or at the time deemed to be for a military effort specifically, and that is its primary usage, therefore it becomes a military target. For instance, the Kerch Bridge, which was struck presumably by Ukraine, though no one has made any kind of confirmation on any of that. The Kerch Bridge, which crosses the Kerch Strait and connects Crimea with mainland Russia, is considered a valid military target. The main purpose of that bridge is it's mainly used via the railways and also sometimes the road in order to move massive quantities of military equipment from mainland Russia through Crimea and into the southern front over by Kherson and over into Zaporizhia. So that makes it a valid military target, even though that there is sometimes civilian traffic on it. But we do end here in Kyiv here on a high note. 103 children were returned to Ukraine. These, quote, as of November the 16th, Ukraine has returned 103 Ukrainian children forcibly deported to Russia by Russian occupiers. And that's coming from Yaroslav Shanko, who's the deputy head of Juvenile Prevention Directorate of the National Police of Ukraine. So, very good. This is something that's been a very hot topic. Remember, the deportation of children from Russia, especially on this massive of a scale, to Russia by Russian forces through occupied areas, that is actually under protocol, under the 1949 Geneva Conventions and the 1993 Rome Statute, is actually considered genocide against Ukraine. Transferring children of a group to another group is actually one of the definitions of genocide according to the Geneva Conventions and the laws of war. So that is something that we have been tracking, and that's something that we have hit several times on just because of its importance into determining whether or not this is, or whether or not you can consider what has happened to Ukraine a genocide. And based off of the evidence we've been able to secure and what we have read through with a multitude of the conventions and the articles within them and their additional protocols, we can determine that this is indeed a genocide against the Ukrainian people. Unfortunately, several of the Russian missiles that ended up striking here yesterday ended up striking in this very small village in the Kyiv Oblast of Plesetsky. Unfortunately, about 12 civilian homes were damaged. And what's even, and while it is very shocking imagery to see these craters in these damaged homes, nothing is quite as shocking as this latest photo, which was released by the Ukrainian government. It is blurred out, so I think it is important to see, as it does not show an immense amount of gore, but it is very impactful, and I think it's important to this news. And I think it's very important to the situation and to illustrate what's happening. And that is that there is the body of a 69-year-old woman who was killed by fragmentation from one of the blasts when she was visiting the grave of her late husband. So this is the destruction of the village itself. We can take a look here. Unfortunately, it does have that copyright music. You can see the massive craters here. These are being caused by ballistic and cruise missile strikes, unfortunately. Just destroying everything in its path. Just absolutely destroying anything around it, damaging homes and structures.
Дитини залишились без даху над головою, і зараз органи місцевого самоврядування надали альтернативне житло. Визначається необхідна допомога територіальної громади районної військової адміністрації. Визначимось по сумам відшкодування на матеріали. Це треба зробити обов'язково. Я особисто буду контролювати постійно. Ну, таку
Go ahead and end it there. But these are not big communities. These are very small communities, and it doesn't take much to do significant damage to them. And for those, this is the warning for you guys. This is that photo of the body of the 69-year-old woman who was killed at the grave of her late husband. She was killed with fragmentation while visiting it. It killed her right then and there as a result of Russian missile strikes. There's a very famous quote, and I wish I could remember who said it, because I did look it up one time, and that is that only the dead have seen the end of war. We come over here and into the Donetsk Oblast. This is as we roll into the Donbass and really where the major fighting is taking place throughout the war. And this is really the front lines now. You're looking at this stretch that runs all the way down from the northern part of what is left of the Kharkiv Oblast to be liberated, all the way down through the Donetsk Oblast, clear up into the Dnipro River, and then onto the southeastern side of the Dnipro River into this latter sections of Zaporizhia and Kherson, and of course into Crimea. Yes, Crimea is part of Ukraine. And what we see over here is we get an update. This is coming from Pavel Krylenko, who's the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. And he says that, quote, on November 15th, number of victims of Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 4 killed, 7 injured. And we do get this from his official Twitter as well. And we can see here, he gives us a graphic, and he does this every day. So this is covering the previous 24 hours. He releases this at 8 a.m. the very next morning, every single morning. And what this graphic depicts is it tells us not just where these individuals were injured or killed, depending on the situation, but it also tells us the number of total. And these is very clear here. This does not include occupied areas such as Mariupol, Volnovakha, Donetsk, or otherwise, where people we also know are unfortunately being killed. And so far, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, since February the 24th, 1,212 people have been killed and 2,600 have been injured as a result of Russian aggression. Kevin says Plato may have said that according to Google regarding the only the dead have seen the end of war. So, very interesting. We come over here and into a Bakhmut, where we have continued to see very heavy fighting. Today was a very mixed bag when it comes to what's been happening on the front lines. It's been very much a tactical pause for many parts of the front lines, as both Russia and Ukraine are reconcentrating their forces and where they plan on making their next big offensive actions. And that's really what we've been seeing over the past 48 to 72 hours, really since the fall of Kherson. And Bakhmut is one of those areas where the fighting does continue. Bakhmut has seen some of the most brutal fighting of the entire war, not to include Mariupol. And Bakhmut, like Mariupol, is mostly destroyed. There's not a single building that has yet to be damaged or destroyed. It is completely damaged and destroyed. There is not a single building left untouched and unmolested. And you can say the same thing about nearby Soledar, Bamuski, and other scenes very similar to that in places such as Kostanivka and places such as Teresk and many others. Chasiv Yar, which we can remember. But Bakhmut does continue to see that very brutal fighting. Ukrainian forces have dug into defensive positions on the outskirts of the city as they continue to push forces of mainly the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group being a Russian private military corporation that was created in 2014 by a man named Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is also known as Putin's chef. And the Wagner Group does operate worldwide, but they are being used right now to substitute manpower issues within the standard Russian army itself. That fighting does continue here, and keep in mind, Bakhmut doesn't provide any kind of meaningful tactical or strategic importance at this point in the war. Earlier it did. At this point, it no longer does. It doesn't serve really any strategic or tactical importance within the front lines right now, for as far as we can tell. And this really looks like a World War I battlefield at this point. But what we end up seeing is it's just, basically just looks like the Western Front. But basically there's no basic services in the city where hundreds, if not thousands, of Ukrainian civilians still continue to live. So this is reportedly TOS 1As, which are the thermal barrack munitions launchers, engaging Ukrainian defensive lines in and around the Bakhmutsk area. And we can't confirm that these are TOS 1As, but something I want to point out, when I say it looks like World War I battlefield, look at the amount of shell craters in the muddy earth around here. And this is everywhere on the entirety of the front line. It looks like this. Just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of shell craters along the entirety of the front line in what has essentially become a no man's land, very reminiscent of that of World War I.
Как в Голливуде засняли. Как в Голливуде засняли все вот эти прилеты.
So you can see the destructive power being thrown there, and that's just a very short and sweet bombardment. Oh, look. So it looks like we got someone new. Tim Epps, welcome to the channel, my friend. I'm glad that you find it enjoyable. Or maybe if not enjoyable, at least a good cause. Says he says that he's a longtime lurker, and he is from Switzerland, and he decided to sign in and subscribe. That's pretty awesome. And he says, I wake up at 3 a.m. to catch the Ukraine live streams. That's pretty awesome, man. I'm glad that you find this informative enough to do that. That's pretty awesome. So thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciate the support. I mean, it helps a lot, and I hope that one day this channel, not that it isn't already doing a lot of good, because I know it. I hope it is. But I hope that we have a huge impact in the future. And it's thanks to people like you. It really is. So you guys as a community are the only reason we have the ability to do such amazing things. So once again, I really appreciate it, guys. I really do. Like, you have no idea. But let's see. Delta Aviation 23 ended up asking, what is the difference between a T-72A and an M1? Are you asking what is the difference between a T-72A and an M1 Abrams? Or, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. So I apologize if I don't understand the question. Yeah. A T-72 M1. So there's not a lot of differences. Okay, so he's just asking a T-72 M1 versus a T-72A A model. So the A model, the T-72As essentially are the basic T-72s, rolled homogeneous steel, that kind of thing. Actually, it doesn't use homogeneous steel. T-72 is actually where they start putting other stuff into it. The T-72 M1 is the T-72 M1s. So there's not a lot of differences between the variants. Generally speaking, most Russian vehicles are very analog compared to what you would consider American vehicles or NATO vehicles. NATO vehicles usually have a lot of optics and electronic suites in them. Most Russian vehicles, former Soviet Republic vehicles, are usually very analog in their capabilities, and they don't have a lot of options to put on extensive amounts of upgrades without a complete overhaul of the system. So most of the upgrades that you see from, say, the T-72, T-72A to T-72Bs and T-72B3s, T-72 BVMs and stuff like that, those are very minute. Normally it has to deal with the ability to put on explosive reactive armor, because explosive reactive armor requires certain mounts. Oh god, for those that can't tell, Dildo of Consequences is trending on Twitter with 1,338 tweets. And the thing is that I can't believe that's happening. The thing is that yeah, so they require mounts to actually put on explosive reactive armor. It's not like you can just, take some super glue and just, like, you can't just do that. Most of it is very minor upgrades. Some of it's tweaking the engines, though not very much. Some of it is explosive reactive armor. Some of them is swapping out the Dishka for an NSVT or something else. It's very, very minor. Maybe getting upgrades to be able to fire different types of HEGMs. There's not a lot of difference. I don't know the difference in variance very well between tanks. It's very, generally speaking, unless they've had a massive overhaul, when it comes to a tank, there's very little difference in its capabilities. So it's not something that necessarily I was trained much more clearly on how to identify the difference between a T-72 and a T-90 than I ever was between a T-72, T-72 BVM, T-72 BV3, or B3 and stuff like that. So I apologize if I can't answer that super clearly, but there's not much of a difference to talk about. Just like there's not much of a difference between a T-72 and a T-80 and a T-80 and a T-90. But that's just how it goes. Soviets really didn't innovate a whole lot between their tank variants. They just saw new cool things that they couldn't afford to maintain and threw them on there. He says, Nuclear asked a question. I have a not so serious question. There are a few villages in Poland called America. If Russia hit one of them, there's one not far from that AA missile hit. He said, would that be attack on Poland or the U.S.? Be an attack on NATO. So it'd be attack on all of us. Because that's how NATO works. Article 5. If a Russian SAM hits a Polish town called America, what's America's response? Probably to talk to Poland, and Poland talks to America, and then everyone gets together at the NATO alliance meeting, and then probably about 5 minutes later, Russia gets bombed back into the Stone Age with stealth fighters that they can't detect because they sent all their stuff to Ukraine and it got blown up. And their Su-35s or whatever the hell they're going to field aren't stealthy, and they'll be shot down from long range past the line of sight missiles. So, yeah, that's probably what would happen in your not so serious news. So anyway, continuing with the news here. This is from Bakhmut as well. Why is Bakhmut completely destroyed? Well, I'll show you. This is a BM-21 Grad system. I can tell you that almost instantly. This is a BM-21 Grad system. It fires 40 Katyusha 122 millimeter unguided or dumbfire rockets of high explosives. These are meant for what is called a saturation bombardment. The point of a saturation bombardment is to put as much explosive power in one specific area as possible. Think of carpet bombing during World War II with the B-17s and massive flights over Germany. Remember how those cities looked on the newsreels? That is basically what you do with a BM-21 Grad battery. That is the point of it. You do not use them on civilian populations and towns. Why? It's considered indiscriminate fire and under Additional Protocol 1 of the Geneva Convention and under the 1949 Geneva Conventions. As a result, it is a war crime to fire indiscriminately. It is a war crime to plan to fire them indiscriminately, and it is a war crime to carry out such orders to do so.
Ти що? І ще хуярю. Єбашить. А то піздатому селі, бля, чуєш? Та це пізда. Все в диму, нахуй. Єбать. Ти що? Ох ти, йопти, блядь. Горить. Ти що?
Just all over town. That's a war crime. And since that's Russian doctrine too, since that is what has been done to every town and village, that makes it systematic. And to be systematic in war crimes makes it a crime against humanity. So, yes, you're watching Crimes Against Humanity in that one video. I hope no one was killed in that. I really hope no one was killed in that. More just footage coming out of here of coming out of Bakhmut area. Does also once again have copyright music here. Aircraft still operating very heavily there on the front lines. Both sides are utilizing their air forces still, even though that the airspaces are contested. You see them taking those high angles of fire as they come in at very, very low. And that allows them to remain undetected by air defense systems and radar. They pop up to fire, and then they immediately make a bank, and they break away from contact, dropping flares and chaff, and that prevents them from being locked onto, and they immediately RTB back to base. They're being used for the same reasons. They're mostly being used to suppress enemy forces to great effects, mostly on the Ukrainian side. They seem to have a little bit more accuracy in their effects. The Russians seem to be continually shot down. Caffeine says Russian doctrine is war crime bingo. That is very true. I think that's the most accurate description of Russian doctrine I have ever heard in my life. Thank you for that, Caffeine. Thank you for that. I will be using that from now on, by the way. I will steal that from you. Your meme is now mine. And now comes in Iranian body armor. Just when you thought that the Shahed 136, the Shahed 131, its smaller cousin, and the Maher 6 drones weren't bad enough damnation as to whether or not Iran is actually participating in supplying Russia with equipment, how about this body armor that has been provided? This is the exact same type of body armor being used by the IRGC, which is Iran's Republican Guard Corps. And we do see that popping up in Ukraine. This is captured by Ukrainian forces. This appears to have been given to mobilized forces in at least limited quantities in order to bolster the obvious immense shortage of equipment, basic military protective equipment that Russia had within its own stockpiles. The country known for hoarding massive amounts of equipment seems to have sold it all off through corruption. And this obviously tells you exactly what the deficiencies are in protective equipment. But Russia is seeing that deficiency is to their detriment, and are trying to remedy that. But this also shows that this is a further deepening of the ties between Russia and Iran's implication directly into the conflict in supporting Russia. Because I don't think you need desert camouflage in Ukraine. I think that's the first thing to point out. You don't usually have desert camouflage in Ukraine. To start with. That's a pretty dead giveaway. So this is actually based off of the PAST G, the PAST GT style of equipment that was used by the U.S. Armed Forces and NATO forces for a very long time, and is still used by other forces throughout the world. You can see very clearly this is coming off of the plate. There you go. Doesn't quite get better than that, does it? Tim Epps asks, I wonder if Russia becomes declared a terrorist state, do these remain war crimes, or are they classified as something else? War crimes are war crimes. So war crimes are covered in several different ways. And there is something that gets differentiated between the two. But this is considered an international armed conflict regardless. It's not that Russia would be... You say Russia's declared a terrorist state. What they are declared is not a terrorist state, but a state sponsor of terrorism. Meaning it is a formal country that sponsors terrorist activities in one shape or supports terrorist activities in one way, shape, or form. It's not exactly being a terrorist state, it's just being a state sponsor of terrorism. And the that doesn't change anything, because it is considered an international party and it is a party to the Geneva Conventions, as Russia is party to all the Geneva Conventions as well as a multitude of others. They are still fall under the realm of war crimes. They still are considered war crimes even if you partake in them or not, just because of the international community. And it's not a regular warfare. We're not seeing a regular warfare like a civil war or an insurgency. So those rules don't apply. And what you are seeing, though, is even though they are each count is an individual war crime. But when you see something become systematic, and this is based off of the 1993 Rome Statute. Sorry, I was thinking there. It's the 1993 Rome Statute. I wanted to say maybe Budapest Memorandum, but that's 1994. But the 1993 Rome Statute lays out what the definition of a crime against humanity is. And actually, we can pull that up. UN definition, crime against humanity. Boom. Give me the United Nations. United Nations Office on Genocide Prevention and the Responsibility to Protect. And according to the Rome Statute of 1993, under Article 7, crimes against humanity is defined as 1. For the purpose of this statute, crime against humanity means any of the following acts when committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack against any civilian population with knowledge of the attack. Meaning, these are war crimes which have been committed systematically and in large scale. Widespread and systematic, directed against any civilian population. So shelling Bakhmut, for instance. Murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment, or other severe deprivation of physical liberty in violation of fundamental rules of international law. Torture, rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, or any other form of sexual violence of comparable gravity. Persecution against any identifiable group as a collectivity on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender, or as defined in paragraph 3, or other grounds that are universally recognized as impermissible under international law in connection with any act referred to in this paragraph or any crime within the jurisdiction of the court. Enforced disappearance of persons, the crime of apartheid, other inhumane acts of similar character, intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury or to body or to mental or physical health. For the purpose of this paragraph, attack directed against any civilian population means of a course of conduct involving the multiple commission of acts referred to in paragraph 1 against any civilian population, pursuant to or in furtherance of a state or organized policy to commit such attack. AKA, this means that you commit a war crime and you do it so many times, and it is something that is being knowingly done so many times, and it is very widespread that it is systematically done. AKA, Russia using dumbfire rockets, using the BM-21 Grad system. Okay, BM-21 Grad system, like I said. Perfect example of, technically, is it an MLRS? Yes. But it uses dumbfire rockets. And its purpose is saturation bombardment. So it's indiscriminate. And you're indiscriminately attacking civilians, which is a war crime. To do that in Seversk, to do it in Bakhmut, in Slavyansk, in Kramatorsk, in Kupiansk, in Kharkiv, Shevchenko, Balaklia, Mariupol, Melitopol, Kherson, to do it to, any village or city, which we've seen how many completely just leveled off the face of the earth. Just how many just leveled off the face of the earth. Gone. Countless nameless villages. Geolocated or not, you don't need to have it geolocated to clearly see that all that's left is the toothpicks of whatever splinters came off of the wood when the house was impacted by a 122 millimeter rocket of high explosives. You see it every day. That is systematic. It's not an incident of war crimes. It is systematically done. Therefore, it makes it a crime against humanity. To plan it, to carry it out, to allow it to happen, that is a war crime. The torture chambers we've seen in every single area under occupation. Some of which we've shown more graphic photos of than others, or provided that resources to you. That is the detainment and torture of people. That is enforcing disappearances. Mass graves. That is murder. The tremendous amounts of sexual assault and violence that it makes it difficult to read. The UN and the UN has an inquiry mission to Ukraine, and they put direct quotes and they read the stories from these women and individuals who were assaulted with some anonymity. And it makes you question the morality of man. It is sick. Young girls, including one that was 10 years old, were reported on coming out of Mariupol, that had sexual trauma. Came to a hospital in Zaporizhia. Her and many other young girls were being treated all in the same hospital for the same types of wounds of sexual trauma. Vaginal and sodomy. Women that were wrapped in carpets and had diesel poured on them and lit on fire to cover up the crimes, who still had signs of rape in Bucha and Irpin and Hostomel and the highways all the way up towards Chernobyl. That's systematic. They describe Ukrainian women who have survived and have recounted their stories. Many have said that the Russians came prepared with condoms provided to them, with Viagra provided to them. That is systematic. That is a crime against humanity. And this is such a large-scale attack on civilian populations, and the forced deportation of children, especially the forced deportation of people, the annihilation of an entire, it's attack on Ukraine based off of nationality, and with the purpose of destroying that nationality. It's been clearly stated that that was the purpose by the Kremlin, by their state-run organizations, their state-run media. And that is genocide by definition. It's an attack on a people with the intent to exterminate the people and culture based off of nationality. That is genocide. It's a genocide of a people. And I did write an article on this. I called it, and I go through and I link the articles and everything. I link the actual documentation regarding the different treaties and stuff that apply, and give it. So if you want more, I can post that like on our Discord and stuff. I can post that for you so you can read it if you're interested. So, yeah, but I go through and I wrote a rather long article on it. If you're interested, I can clear that up more. But with that, we move on, because it's getting kind of tough to talk about that. Good enough. This is what Russia describes as repairs. See? This is a Mariupol. Mariupol's been bombed, just absolutely destroyed. This building has the entire top part of this building just destroyed. Yup. We fixed it, boss. We're just going to slap some corrugated metal on top and call it a roof. Meanwhile, there's also a lot of photos and videos coming out today of residents in Mariupol writing help and SOS in multiple languages, Ukrainian, Russian, and English, and marking the dates down so that people know that it is recent, because they are scared to death that they are going to freeze to death in the wintertime because there's nothing in the city of Mariupol. There's nothing. There's no electricity. There's no gas. There's no running water. There's no sanitation. There's no food. There's no water. There's no nothing. You have nothing. You don't have a home. 90% of Mariupol is so destroyed that if it hasn't collapsed on its own, it will have to be demolished and rebuilt. It has no structural integrity left. These people are going to freeze to death in the winter. There's nothing anyone can do about it unless they become liberated. Meanwhile, out of Mariupol, we are seeing new invasion markings. Initially, invasion markings were thought to be based off of the axis of advance of Russian forces. It would appear that that is not the case, and there's some evidence to prove that. When the third Third Corps of the Russian Army, which is a whole new corps, a whole new group of the Russian Army, was formed in Russia. This is prior to the mobilization. This was the volunteer battalions that had been hastily formed. They came in and they had new invasion markings. This one also now has new invasion markings. It would appear that a new army group has moved into Russia or into Ukraine, and into Mariupol. So my assessment personally is that the identifying marks on a Russian vehicle is based solely on their army group designation. So you have different symbols. You have the circles, and you have the triangles, and you have the Z's, and you have the V's, and everything else. That is like First Army Group, Second Army, the Russian First Army, the Russian Second Army, the Russian Third Army, the Russian whatever army, Dead Army, I don't care. Anyway, it seems that originally different army groups were put on different axes of advance, which makes sense. So that way you had one army group on this axis, you have one army group on this axis, and that's why it seemed to designate their axis of advance. It really just seems to be identifying marks of certain army groups so they can identify certain units depending on what's coming out. And that appears to be the case here. This is a new symbol, which tells us this is a circle, a red circle, or a red triangle with a white triangle and a circle inside of it. This appears to be a new insignia for a new army group. So this is telling us that there is a new army group that is coming into Ukraine, that is going to be coming to the front lines. We don't know. This is probably mobilized troops, but that tells us that there has been a new army formed and that they're moving in here. I do not know if this means that they have taken several army groups that are just absolutely annihilated and tried to form one new one to improve flexibility, but Russia isn't known for its flexibility, so I think they're just bringing in whatever they have left. But those also look very hastily painted, which leads me to believe it's conscripted troops that have arrived here and are getting ready to push to the front lines. We can come up here where we see Ukrainian forces trolling the Russians. They shot down a Shahed drone, and they took the remnants of the Shahed drone, and they wrote in Russian with the parts of what was left of this drone, penis in Russian. That's what's left of the Shahed. Gotta enjoy trolling the Russians. shoot down their drone, use it to troll them. Coming down here into Melitopol, the Russians are beginning to fortify the city. This is as grave concerns come that Ukraine could just completely overrun Russian forces, I guess, at this point. And so we're starting to see extensive amounts of defensive structures being built here in around Melitopol, and they're basically building up their defensive positions around the key city. So, very telling that they are already building heavy defenses around Melitopol. That's very telling. That means that there's a lot of faith in the guys at the front lines right now on the part of the Russians. Coming from the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, we see here, this is coming from Valentin Reznichenko, who's the head of the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration. He said that, quote, emergency power outages keep going in Dnipropetrovsk region. Up to 300,000 local consumers are currently without electricity. And unfortunately, those attacks are unlikely to stop, meaning that that number will likely only grow, and that number will be much, much more difficult to lower as energy infrastructure continually is pummeled by large amounts of Russian strikes that make repairs difficult, especially as we head into the wintertime, where a lot of these people are going to need this electricity. More and more munitions are being found, of course, as the consolidation and the indexing within the Kherson region continues. Former Russian 120 millimeter mortar cache was found here in the Kherson Oblast. A fairly sizable collection of 120 millimeter 3VZ4 incendiary munitions, 120 millimeter D5 Willie Pete or white phosphorus smoke munitions, also commonly used to engage Ukrainian positions, and mixed OF 843 high explosive shells. Take a look.
Ось, а ви кажете, ленд-лізу нема.
So, a little bit of news here. And what we see here is that, so a little bit of interesting stuff to tell you guys. So, the Russians don't use the same, they don't use the same identifying thing. Like, if you notice on missiles and stuff, you'll see that they have, yellow bands and stuff on them. But this is, they don't use the same color coding mechanism to be able, for me to be able to identify each of these rounds. But a little bit of information for those that don't know how a mortar works. A mortar works by, usually there's a firing pin at the bottom, and you'll see that these actually have, these might have the primers taken out of them, but they have a firing pin at the bottom, and it basically is just like a firing pin in a rifle. The firing pin protrudes forward, strikes the back of the round, it leaves an indent, and that fires the munition. It's basically how it works. Any mortars are very high angle, meaning they go up and then they come right back down. And these are used, there's different variants, there's different sizes. You see most commonly 60 millimeter mortars for a company element. For a battalion element, you'll see 82, which is the Russians, or 81 millimeter mortars. And then at a regimental level, especially for the Army, probably brigade level, I think, for the Army. The Marine Corps doesn't use them, though we have had to use them. The principles are the same. 120 millimeter mortar rounds, like what these are. These things weigh 50 pounds a piece, by the way. They are extremely heavy. But the way that you increase the range and the distance that you're able to fire a mortar round is with these things called increments. There's usually 4 of them, and they go on the back of the fin. These things are filled with explosives, and essentially these things burn extremely high. In fact, you have to turn your eyes away so you don't get blinded by whatever is in these things. But you have charge 0, which is just the mortar round itself, like this. And then you have charge 1, charge 2, charge 3, and charge 4. And that increases the distance that the mortar round will actually travel. And that's basically what you have to calculate for whatever they're figuring up over at the FTC. But why do 120 millimeter have a lag time between dropping the round and the discharge? Some mortars do not do, or some mortars don't fire immediately when they are dropped. So, for instance, the 60 millimeter mortar, the ones that are used by the Marine Corps, I never had them in my personal armory or I didn't have them in the armory when I ran it. I only carried 81s. They actually can be switched between two modes. You can actually fire them with a trigger, and you can actually fire them. You can just have it to where you drop rounds and they immediately go off. Some mortars, like the 120 millimeter mortars, 120 millimeter mortars, when you get that large, some things. The reason why the Marine Corps doesn't use them is because in the Marine Corps, anything that large, 120 millimeter mortars are considered an artillery asset, not a infantry asset. So the 120 millimeter mortar is considered an artillery asset, and in many ways, it is much more similar to that. 120 millimeter mortars can be fired with a pull ring, similar to how you would pull an artillery gun. Or how you would pull, you could pull the string on an M109 Paladin from outside of the cabin. That's something you can do. That's why they sometimes have delays between when they go off, because they're not triggered to fire yet, much like an artillery gun is. And that's just because of their size and how they handle them. And it depends on the variant too. Every country has their own little weird things that they do with their weapon systems. Do mortars have proximity fuses, or can they? Mortars, you do have to set the fuse, as far as I'm tracking. Once again, I'm not a mortarman by trade. I have dropped mortar rounds. I have fired artillery guns, but I am not trained to do it. I had the opportunity to, because I was really good friends with a lot of guys in 81s and a lot of guys in 60 millimeter mortars. So I had the wonderful opportunity to do it, and I made some good friends overseas with the artillery, but I've never been trained on how to do it. It is difficult. It is a very, very difficult skill, and I'm very impressed with the accuracy that mortarmen can achieve. And the FTC is just black magic. We just call it black magic, whatever they do. But yes, they do. You do set the fuse. I believe you can set it for an air burst. You have to set the fuse for things like flare rounds, for instance. That's how you are able to achieve how long. And you can actually set patterns in the sky with flare rounds if you're good enough. We actually did it for Christmas when I was in Syria. They took the mortars and they took a bunch of flare rounds, and to celebrate Christmas, they fired a bunch of flare rounds and they made a Christmas tree with it. That's a thing. Yeah. So, yes. But I hope that answers your questions. But I thought it was kind of cool because most people, you don't get to see mortar rounds like this very often. Normally, you just see them when they're getting dropped down the tube. And that is why we call them tube strokers. But seriously, please approve my fire mission. Please, FTC, please approve my fire mission. We see a police station was destroyed here in the Kherson Oblast. Now, it wasn't destroyed by enemy action directly. The Russians, when they were pulling out here of Kherson, they left behind a massive amount of booby traps. And this is exactly why it is too dangerous to return right now. Wait for people to please clear this area if you happen to be Ukrainian from this region before you return. And the reason being is this police station was so heavily mined, it was too dangerous to be left. The Ukrainian authorities came there. They noticed it was completely booby-trapped. They called EOD and Ukrainian engineers to come out and take a look at it and see if they can go through and demine this location and deem it safe. It was so heavily... it was so heavily mined that I hit the desk there. It kind of hurt. It was so heavily mined that not even EOD was willing to go in there. They said that there was no way of demining that without setting it off, without setting the whole building off. So what they did is they had to cordon off the area, evacuate the area, and then they had to do what was called a controlled detonation, where they actually plant explosives and purposely destroyed the building and all of the explosives inside, just because it was too dangerous to do it any other way, and there was no other way to do it without risking and more than likely losing lives doing it. So this used to be a police station. And this, if it's like this in just one building, it is almost impractical to think what would happen to the other buildings too. What other buildings are also mined to this extent, nobody knows. And this region, once again, the investigation has really just begun within this region. So there's very little information coming out right now, and there's still a lot yet to be discovered. And unfortunately, I have a feeling that will also include booby traps too, similar to what we've seen in other regions as well, especially up in the northern parts of Ukraine earlier this year. Coming out of Novokakhovka, or near Novokakhovka. So if you may remember, the night before the attack against, or the night before with the withdrawal of Russian forces from the Kherson region, the occupational head of the government, his name was Stramusov. He was killed in a police accident. All right, and he was killed in a vehicle accident. New imagery has come out today that that may not be the case. Right now, they are claiming that his vehicle was actually shot at by unknown people after it crashed. That may not be the case. You can see very obvious bullet holes in the glass here and in the armor and in the cabin itself. Now, it's unclear if these are bullet holes directly or if these are, in fact, it could possibly be tungsten pellets that came out from a HIMARS missile, though we cannot be sure. But it is very heavily damaged. You can see bullet holes all the way around the door here. So it's very possible that he was engaged and it either forced him to crash the vehicle as he lost control out of being just scared for his life, or if the armor did not end up stopping the rounds from coming through and ended up killing him, which then forced the vehicle to crash. Either way, it's not known, but there is more information suggesting that it was a much different situation than what was previously stated, though that was already heavily suspected upon. We already suspected that was not the truth. Tim Epps says if that was an ambush, he might be captive now. He died. He did not survive. They did confirm that he was dead, like he had been killed. And we do believe that. If it was it would have been partisans that would have done that. And the partisans aren't too keen on taking prisoners, if that makes sense, to put it mildly. The Red Cross, the Ukrainian Red Cross here, resumed work. This is the regional headquarters for the Kherson region for the Ukrainian Red Cross. They did come back and they have now resumed work, providing humanitarian assistance throughout the Kherson region. So they have set up their administration's abilities, and they did announce this on their official Twitter here as well. The Kherson Regional Organization of the Ukrainian Red Cross resumes its work today. The board of Ukrainian Red Cross Society made the decision to resume the work of the Kherson Regional Organization of the Ukrainian Red Cross Society. So that will provide more humanitarian aid here. Before we wrap up Ukraine over there in Odessa, we jump down into Crimea, where it is being reported, as you can see here at the giant amount of fortifications here. This is actually a Russian airbase. And there are heavy reports that this airbase is currently being struck, or was being struck several hours ago when we first got this, by Ukrainian forces Keep in mind, this part of Crimea is now within range of, without the ATACMS, this is now within range of Ukrainian HIMARS missiles. Take a look. Once again, no visual confirmation there, so I want to be clear that this is reported. Reportedly, this is happening here. But we do not have any visual confirmation to follow up on that, but it was a big enough development. I figured it was important to add so we could follow up with it, hopefully there on Friday. And finally, we come over here to the Odessa region where we get a grain corridor update from the Ministry of Infrastructure. And they say that, quote, 8 more ships have left Ukrainian ports Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Privdeny through the grain corridor. 269,000 tons of Ukrainian agricultural products are on board, heading to countries of Europe, Africa, and Asia. End quote. So that is everything inside the country of Ukraine, but that doesn't mean that the story ends. And we come over here up into Moscow as we roll into the international news, where we see is reality really starting to set in for the Russians. Propagandists are starting to come to a realization that they will need to say bye to their favorite cars and phones as the nation continues to nationalize. Take a look and take a listen. This has been confirmed. We do have an in-house translator, by the way, fluent in both Russian and Ukrainian, who is able to translate and verify translations for us. So this is correct. Take a look.
Давайте пойдем национализируем. Пойдемте национализируем. Давайте у немцев сейчас все заберем. У нас встанут сапсаны. Вот завтра встанут. Мы на чем ездить будем? На дрезинах, что ли? Не на чем у нас ездить. Но надо это просто признать. Конечно, легко встать на броневик и сказать, давайте все национализируем. Давайте. А на чем мы будем ездить? Чем мы будем звонить? Что мы будем делать? Мы с вами, что ли, к этому привели? Давайте, я не знаю, к ответственности привлечем тех, кто к этому привел. Давайте. Но от этого не появится Сапсан сейчас новый. Самолет не появится. Дальнемагистрального самолета у нас нет. Да, у нас все западное.
Правительство или...
Пожалуйста, национализируем сейчас. И что делать-то будем на следующий день? Что мы делать будем? Простой вопрос, ответа нет. А так, конечно, все с вами согласны. Давайте пойдем национализируем.
Look at that reality starting to set in. Wow, actually, we probably shouldn't have cut ourselves off from the entirety of the rest of the world by being a bunch of assholes. Meanwhile, we jump over here into Poland where we have an update coming out of Zhevodov, I want to say. Once again, I'm trying to get better at pronouncing this, but my pronunciation is terrible. Here in Poland, where the missile strike occurred, Zhevodov, we see that the missile strike was likely an accident. We initially reported, as pretty much everyone else in the world did, that Russian missile apparently ended up impacting into Poland. And we did add, because right before the stream there was some statements made by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, that said that there's questions as to whether or not it was actually a Russian missile, and that something seemed very off with it. So we did want to include that, and it's very good that we did, because there are questions about it. It's likely an accident. According to the preliminary investigation, the missile strike that hit a agricultural storage facility and ended up killing 2 individuals in this very small community of just about 400 is likely to be a Ukrainian S-300 air defense missile that was attempting to intercept incoming Russian missiles during the swarm attack yesterday. Ukraine has not confirmed the evidence and is, in fact, in some ways disputing it at this point. But that is according to the that preliminary investigation, and that those findings are being reported by Poland's president, by the United States government and the NATO Secretary General, who have all made statements regarding this. And so we take a look here. This is coming from the White House press release regarding this. This is the statement by the National Security Council spokesperson Andreen Watson, who said, "We have full confidence in the Polish government's investigation of the explosion near their border with Ukraine. We commend them for the professional and deliberate manner in which they are conducting it. We will not get ahead of their work and remain in close touch with their Polish counterparts as we are still gathering information. We have seen nothing that contradicts President Duda's preliminary assessment that the explosion was most likely the result of a Ukrainian air defense missile that unfortunately landed in Poland. We will continue to assess and share any new information transparently as it becomes available. We will also continue to stay in close touch with the Ukrainians regarding any information they have to fill out the picture." And this is the statement made by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who is in charge of NATO essentially, regarding this incident. Go ahead and take a listen and have a listen here.
But we have no indication that this was the result of a deliberate attack. And we have no indication that Russia is preparing offensive military actions against NATO. Our preliminary analysis suggests that the incident was likely caused by a Ukrainian air defense missile fired to defend Ukrainian territory against Russian cruise missile attacks. But let me be clear. This is not Ukraine's fault. Russia bears ultimate responsibility as it continues its illegal war against Ukraine. But we have no indication.
You heard it from the man himself. Was it a Ukrainian missile that ended up hitting it? We don't know. It's preliminary investigation information, right? This is the stuff. And we've seen in preliminary investigations be very wrong before. And so we're not making any statements to say like it is or is not Russian or Ukrainian. I want to make that clear because I am not conducting an investigation into this attack, and I'm not there to look at it or anything else. But right now, according to the president of Poland, the missile landed in that man's country. He has kind of the final word, and the rest of the world is saying, "Hey, Poland, like this is up to you. Like, what do you want to do on this? Like, it's your territory. What are you going to do, or what do you want to do?" So they are currently saying that it was likely an S-300 air defense system launched by Ukraine during the massive swarm of ballistic missiles that were coming into the country, especially into areas like Lviv, that ended up missing its target and ended up landing and unfortunately killing at least 2 people inside of Poland. And this is something a lot of people are asking or are saying, that they're surprised that it hasn't happened yet, that it has taken this long for the war to spill over in some ways. A lot of people are saying, see everyone saying Article 5, when's Article 5 going to happen? Likely the most that we will see as a response is probably in Article 4. Article 4 gives the conditions to have dialogue regarding defense and to make necessary adjustments to ensure the defense of the nation and to improve the nation's security posture in such events. So that is kind of what we're looking at right now. So, yeah. But once we get more information, we will let you know. But that is what we're looking at as of right now. I see a lot of people are kind of disappointed in this. Regardless of the situation, a lot of people are saying, oh, Article 5. It is very unlikely that there would be an Article 5 over this. Even if it was very clearly a Russian missile, it is very unlikely that there would be an Article 5 over this. The last time an Article 5 was invoked was very shortly after 9/11, after the United States was attacked and over 2,700 American citizens were killed during an attack by terrorists on 9/11. Right? That's a pretty massive attack. And this is a stray missile that landed in a very unimportant border farm town and tragically killed 2 people. And we can get to talk about, how, this is what they've said and this is what they should do and the principle of it all, and we get to talk about that. But ultimately, we as viewers and as staff members on the new news team do not have to make the decisions as to whether or not it is the right thing to do to send thousands of people, if not millions of people, to their deaths over a missile that landed in a agricultural storage facility in border town in Poland. And traditionally speaking, responses by the NATO alliance and by the United States and NATO allies is proportional. And to go to an Article 5 immediately, like that, would not be very proportional to the incident and its scope. As tragic as it may be, but it's very unlikely that should it have even been a very clear Russian missile, that it would not trigger an Article 5. So I want to make that pretty clear. There's a lot of different avenues that we don't know and that we don't get to see or talk about, for a good reason probably, as to how things can be handled like that. And I continue to, say, I got to see that kind of thing during in 2020. So if you may remember, in 2020, the Baghdad embassy compound was attacked by protesters, primarily Kataib Hezbollah, which is a popular mobilization force, in Iraq, and it almost breached the embassy. It did technically breach the embassy, but we were able to resecure it. And General Qassam al-Soleimani, who is the commander of the Quds Force, he's an Iranian general, came to Baghdad International Airport, where he was killed by an MQ-9 Reaper drone, which killed him and the deputy leader of Kataib Hezbollah and the popular mobilization forces. In a drone strike in their car as they were leaving the airport. The Iranians rung up the red flag of death, and they fired a bunch of ballistic missiles at a U.S. military compound in Erbil, Iraq, and also on Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. That is the point that you guys heard, and everyone heard that, and everyone said, this is... we're on the brink of World War III. We're going to go to war with Iran, yada, yada, yada. That is the part that most people heard. What you didn't see is the fact that General Qassam al-Soleimani was killed because he was meeting with meeting with the deputy leader of the Popular Mobilization Forces, under the pretext that he was there to hand-deliver a letter to the Prime Minister of Iraq. The U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad had been breached and had been resecured, but there were only 100 Marines in the compound to maintain that security. There's a lot of popular mobilization forces in Iraq and a lot of people behind Muqtada al-Sadr who was also backing this, that could have been put into they were carrying weapons. They had tents out on Al-Kindi Street, and they had weapons with them, so that way they could turn it into an actual kinetic engagement. The United States killed General Qasem Soleimani because he was planning to attack and finally overrun the U.S. Embassy compound in Iraq and finish what had been started, and to do it in a military way, which is why we killed him, because he was an imminent threat, and he was the one guy that could have showed up that would have been able to plan such a successful operation. Iran understands this, and Iran ends up firing ballistic missiles, but they fire them into locations that are relatively unused on the bases in Erbil, or they fire them into the open field in Erbil. If you've ever seen the photos of the impact craters, they land in the middle of nowhere, and the ones hit a bunch of mostly empty hangars and stuff around Al-Assad Air Base, stuff that's not very primarily used, and away from the main billeting areas. The United States government and the U.S. forces in Erbil and in Al-Assad, actually the majority of them left the base prior to the attack on armored vehicles, and created a convoy and a coil formation outside of the base prior to the attacks happening, with them staging about 2 hours prior, which indicates that several phone calls were made, and Iran on their media ended up reporting that they had killed like 300 something Americans to their people, showing that they had saying that they had committed such actions, right? And they had a major military response. No Americans were killed, which would not require an American response in return. And unfortunately, they ended up shooting down a Ukrainian airliner in Tehran and killing everyone on board, believing it was a B-52 bomber coming in for retaliatory strike. But ultimately, neither the United States nor Iran would go to war, and the situation almost instantaneously at that moment de-escalates. That's some political trickery that lets both countries save face, tell their people something was accomplished, and the situation goes away, because they both know that the ultimatum, the ultimate end of what would happen if that situation were to continue, was going to be absolutely brutal for both of them, and neither of them want the endeavor. NATO and Russia almost certainly have that exact same kind of dialogue, even if they're not on good terms, because the ultimate end of it is, if that is to continue in a poor direction, is in an already unstable environment, is much, much worse than what is happening right now. Neither NATO nor Russia want to escalate this war. That's the one thing that they have in common, and that's the one thing that they will do damn near anything not to do. So, I hope that kind of gives you an idea as to kind of some of the political foolery that's happening, and I hope that helps you understand that as someone that's not there, someone that's not part of those discussions and is just kind of seeing what is being presented to you, you may not have the full picture unless you are actively involved in the situation at a high level. And so I hope that helps you understand that this isn't an isolated incident, that even if it is a Russian missile, it may amount to, even if it was a Russian missile, it would probably amount to nothing. Other than it's a tragedy and some more international condemnation in the exact same speech that we have heard 16 times at the United Nations Security Council meeting, coming in whatever they call the next emergency session at the discretion of Poland. And with that, we move on up here into the United Kingdom, where the General Staff of Ukraine on their official Twitter released a new video regarding the training being provided to them during Operation Univer, where Canadian troops, as well as a coalition of other countries, are training Ukrainian recruits into a fast-paced NATO-style training program here. So they released a brand new video. Let's take a look. There you guys go. It's a pretty good video. They released some pretty good videos for Operation Unifer, I will say. I'm very impressed with them. And it does look like a movie, doesn't it? Yeah. I see some people saying, when's this movie come out? Yeah, no kidding, right? I would like to see a documentary about how they actually train them. Because I think that would be very cool. Not just like snippets like we usually get, but like an actual sit down. This is what happened. Like, this is how we went through and did it. Military recruiters take note. You know what the best recruiting commercials are? The Marine Corps, hands down. Hands down. Even though they're kind of cheesy, like the Marine Corps is very well known for the recruiting campaigns. Hell, they get people just to sign up because they want the cool uniforms. Mobilists can't compete with that. 25% of Russia doesn't even have running water. No, they can't compete with that. You could flip a quarter and you get a more accurate answer as to whether or not the person has electricity in Russia, let alone the ability to see the TV, right? Coming down here, this is in the Daraa, in the city of Daraa down here in southern Syria. We see that fighting has finally come to an end here in Daraa. After 15 days of fighting in the Al-Sad region of Daraa, the Syrian army was able to return it under its control, although the operation to destroy the Islamist cell can be considered a failure because despite the involvement of large forces, the militant commanders and their subordinates managed to escape the area. None of the Islamic State field commanders that the military was looking for were killed or arrested. Most of these guys are not standard national army, but instead these guys are mostly pro-Assad regime, basically militia forces. Which are, I would, in my personal opinion, are more brutal. Coming up here, this is from an explosion that occurred in a residential building in Kurdalan here in Azerbaijan. The incident took place on the first floor of a residential high-rise building. According to the preliminary information, the incident was caused by a gas leak that's ended up injuring, once again, 4 people. We continue going south here, where we stop here in Iran, and we stop in Tehran here, where oil workers walk out and join regime protests. Iran's energy sector has come under threat as thousands of oil workers have reportedly abandoned their posts to join ongoing protests against the state. Iranian oil workers were filmed as they staged a mass walkout amid an ongoing dispute over pay, working conditions, and government mismanagement. The strike has fueled momentum behind a nationwide protest, which has called for the leaders of the Iranian regime to be deposed. Keep in mind, people were just sentenced to death for this, and the majority of the Iranian government officials in their parliament voted in favor of execution for anyone arrested for the protests. Police brutality does continue. So this woman was beat by police, morality police, near a grocery store. As officers mistook her for a protester. She's heard screaming. She's just shopping for groceries. So police crackdowns do continue. But despite that, unknown people opened fire on a crowded market here in the southern part of Iran. Unknown people attacked a crowd gathered in central market of the city. As a result of the shooting, at least 5 people were injured, including a policeman, and 5 more were injured. 5 people were killed, including a policeman, and 5 more were injured. Iranian sources published a video of the attack. This shows the attackers were moving on a motorcycle. They managed to quietly leave the scene of the incident due to the confusion in the city engulfed in protests. The wounded have already been taken to a local hospital. Some sources reported that the number of victims has reached 20 people. It's not known who's behind the attack. Come down here and just off the coast of Oman, where unidentified people ended up attacking an oil tanker. They attacked an oil tanker using a kamikaze drone. Reportedly, the vessel received minor damage. Its crew was not injured, and there is no threat of an oil spill. Pacific Zircon tanker is owned by a Singaporean shipping company, Eastern Pacific Shipping, founded by Israeli billionaire Aidan Ofer. The attack is associated between the aggravation of relations between Iran and Israel because one of the suspects in the incident are militants of pro-Iranian groups. So we continue to see oil tankers being attacked in some of the one of the most dangerous regions in for commercial vessels. In Pakistan, up here in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, we see over in the city of Laki Marwat, where 6 guards were killed by unknown militants. The militants opened fire on a police minibus. 6 guards were killed. No one has yet taken responsibility for the attack. There's a little bit of graphic footage here, so we are not going to show this on film, but if you on the stream. But if you want to check it out, you can come and get our map from our website and take a look at it if you are so inclined. So down here, just off the coast of Bali here in Indonesia, a ferry carrying 271 people ended up catching fire. The tourist ship Mutiara Timur 1 caught fire this Wednesday off the coast of Indonesian island of Bali, according to a representative of the Indonesian National Search and Rescue Agency. Ship was carrying an estimated 236 tourists and 35 crew. So far, there's no information about the cause of the incident or if there are any victims.
Woi, woi, bayi. Ini ada bayi juga. Ush. Ayo. Awas. Topakin nggak? Ngantre kang. Gimana?
And we come over here. This is on the very, very, very small island nation. This is in Tuvalu, where $4 million for drought relief have been provided. On November 8th, the government of Tuvalu declared a state of public emergency due to the extreme drought conditions affecting the whole country. The Asian Development Bank provided a $4 million emergency grant to the government to fund drought relief efforts. If you want more information on that, you can go and check out relief.web. So, very small, nice little island nation, just a little atoll nation, but pretty cool. There's a lot of those around there. This is all, I believe, in general Micronesia. Actually, I think Micronesia is here to the north, but yep, over here. Then you also have the Marshall Islands and the Marshall Island campaigns, the Marshall and Gilbert Islands, the Mariana Islands, Solomons. Come over here into Somalia, where, of course, we have an update on the drought here as well. According to the Somalia Drought Response and Famine Prevention Plan, about 6.7 million people are facing acute food insecurities, up from 4.3 million who were experiencing acute food insecurity between June and September of 2022. So the number has drastically increased. There was reduced rainfall activities across Somalia over the last 1 week. The rainfall forecast over the next 7 days indicates moderate rains across central and southern regions of Somalia. Still, more rains are required to bring an end to the current drought conditions across Somalia. This is coming from IOM Somalia.
ما كوكوي لفماكدا أبارتون يونا أبار لمدة قليقان هرما أرننا لفماك سيون هم كتامني إلا بولاو تدوغي إتدو همينها لوهايا يا كان يونا يقورتان إنساري نينها يا أنتوكوي ونوا لوهايانا يا أبهول أرنتان دوم غاتو بلا يؤتيغنتي يا مزمين إلهي أو غاري ودان أدتا الله نيكبي abaartum hore iyo abaartum hatan hayd ihani hore may bakishal egiye may bakishal eyna di hore walba reebasi mado musgeedo waa gagaab ee banin bahay mado dadka ba duunyada ba ya wal helaan abaartu beero ya abaarsadaya duunyada ya wal helaasi tan dakkan waja raboko wal malakun safan le wal dad idduunyo wal ya reeba soba malle bay igad meeliye hatigeek inta roobka dhil ee rooban lahayna dad duunyada hatta far duunya tirtiran hoogina laakiin shaqay faniiba ma ilaahay usuba hoolagaysi kiyo abaarta kiin ku baan si usun garaay usun biilay leeba jeebtees damba dhamaada yaminko quraad hoobna helna gaaba ashida niin gambaasay biyo waraana jiifdo hay teed halkan horta saasa iriidan tangabna tusurunaya golol mahaysana bibi hem gogolka yani bilawdan ilaahay rooba hooy mahaysana ardulka oo ilaahay be fidiya isku jiifdo hayn ayo am le roma ku faa'iideysinay biya geeknin bilawti biyo walka dhaansadaan yana seedi baaldina seedi saabungan seedi kulooringan seedi idonkin ma ku codsadaana inni ona gargaar degdeg ah dadkun oo hooy masaakin tun dhibaataysan hooylaan ee iriidun surno gurun haysana walyo walka karsadan qabne noolaha tukada ku noolan in degdeg ee gargaar degdeg ah ka kadeeran ya ku codsadaan.
And that's coming from the UN's IOM Somalia. We jump across into Bolivia, where a dried up lake affects the local community. This is the community of Urumurato, a community left after waters of the Pupo disappeared. The World Food Program is starting a project to assist those who have stayed behind.
Hemos quedado así, sin territorio, hemos confiado al lago, nuestros padres confiaron en el lago, que va a estar permanente, y no fue así, ¿no? De repente se secó el lago y nos dejó sin trabajo.
Pescado había así grande, era esa vez. Un pescadito era 3 kilos, era grande, así.
quedado huérfanos así, sin trabajo, sin fuente de trabajo. ¿Dónde ir? ¿Dónde salir a trabajar? Tenemos que trabajar a la fuerza, aprendiendo albañil, jornaleando, pasteando ganados para otra gente. No era fácil, ¿no?
La problemática es de los urces grandes, ¿no? Que somos nosotros pescadores, hombres del lago. Nuestra Cochamama, nuestra madre, tierra Cochamama, ya está totalmente contaminado con las minas.
There you guys go, coming from AJ Plus. You come up here into Washington, D.C., where $43.5 million will be provided for youth empowerment in South Sudan. The U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, announced a $43.5 million award to empower young people in South Sudan, especially girls and young women with knowledge and skills that will enable them to lead healthy lives. The plan would recruit 500 youth leaders and train them as mentors for marginalized youth. And if you want more information on that, you can go and check out either USAID, or you can also go and check out reliefweb.international. And so now we get into the good news of the night, and that is the recap for you all who may not have been here for last night's stream, and that is the Artemis 1 launch. And the Artemis 1 is a historical event, and it was an honor and a privilege to be able to watch it with you all here on the new news and be able to see it happen live. The Artemis 1 is a space-going craft. It comprises of multiple different things. The most notably, I can say there's a European asset to it that I cannot remember the name of, unfortunately, but there's also the Orion spacecraft and the SLS rocket system. It is an unmanned mission that will go around the moon, and during its flight, it will test all of the components of the missile, or of the rocket, and of the space pod, or in the space capsule, to be able to test and make sure that it will work for when astronauts go to the moon during the next manned mission. The next manned mission will go around the moon. It will do a flyby on Artemis 2, and on Artemis 3, they will be landing on the moon with hopes of actually creating a moon base by Artemis 4. They want to be able to land on the moon no later than 2025. It launched at 1:47 and 44 seconds a.m. Eastern Standard Time early this morning. Then that launch happened during that 2-hour window. They had some delays that began to eat into that 2-hour launch window, which initially started at 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time. We remained live thanks to a unanimous vote of everyone here that was participating in that, and 100% of everyone that voted. There was 7 out of 8 people that were watching voted unanimously to continue keeping that going live until we saw the moon launch. So thank you very much for that. And we do have some of that here for you guys here. So for those that missed it, this is the last 48 seconds of the launch. This is after we had waited and had so many delays, but it was so worth it. This is the launch of the Artemis 1 spacecraft.
And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone.
And here we go.
So there you go. That was the first 48 seconds of the launch there for you guys as it had launched. This is very long awaiting. President Biden shipped in here. He commented on it, saying NASA's Artemis is in flight. This ship will enable the first woman and first person of color to set foot on the lunar surface. It will lead to countless students to become explorers and show America's limitless possibilities to the world. And he has a very good photo of that launch there, of course. And today we get a nice special photograph. This is the view of Earth by the Orion spacecraft. And this happened when it was roughly 58,000 miles away from Earth. Take a look. And there is the inside view of the capsule. That is not an individual. That is just the suit. They are testing everything on this mission before they put somebody up inside the next capsule when it goes up for real. So they do have a dummy in there to be able to test the new suits and everything else that they are sending up. So pretty awesome. Pretty awesome that we are getting that. So Artemis 1 is really important. It's really the next step. Going back to the moon and setting up a lunar base. The steps that what the Artemis program is looking to do is begin to set up for the Mars mission. So this is really where we will be going to the moon and setting up a lunar base and testing stuff that can only really be tested in space. And also giving us a new staging point to go from Earth to the moon, and then from the moon to Mars. And really starting that branch out of humanity. You are on the beginning. You are watching the beginning. And if you were with us last night, you watched the moment that humanity is becoming, or the humanity is actually starting to go for becoming an interplanetary species. That was the step, because that is the goals that they are laying out right now for these missions and their follow-on missions, is to become an interplanetary species. This isn't about a space race. It's about expanding the human endeavor and expanding to more places to live and to colonize the worlds around us and all of that. So that is the plan. That is what they are looking to do. That's even what the mission leader there in Kennedy Space Center said. Here's to the moon and eventually to Mars. So that is the plan for NASA with these. And it's awesome to see. So you're witnessing history as we were talking about it here. And so with that, that is everything that is happening in the world today, at least from our sources. And so I hope that you guys ended up finding this thing very informative, if maybe not enjoyable, at least very informative. And if not, then that's okay too. I can't always win them all. Now, we do this for a purpose, though. We do this because we want to be able to be the news that gives back. We report on these situations to inform you about what's happening in the world around you, so you can make well-informed decisions as a result, and to give you an opportunity to help the people that need it the most. I am willing to bet that you may be suffering through some hardship in your life, and that's okay and understandable. I certainly do myself. But you're probably in a much better position if you're watching this than most of the people that we report on here on the news. And so if you can't give a lot to these organizations that are down in the description, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. One of the biggest things you can do is help us grow this channel and to grow the impact it has. So you guys allow us to be the news that gives back, and without you guys and your support and your continue to try and expand this thing with us, this thing just will never work. But thank you very much for the support you have given us, and thank you very much for supporting all of those wonderful organizations that are trying to do a lot of good. And I hope that you guys will continue that endeavor. So if you can, give us a like, give us a subscribe, let your friends know about us, and share us amongst your communities. You can always follow us on Twitter as well. I host spaces and jump into spaces every once in a while and talk about a multitude of topics. But with that, I hope that you guys will be back to join us on Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central, for a 48-hour of news in review. My name is Paul from the New News. Please be safe and have a great night, everybody. Bye now.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти волноваги, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлепуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти волноваги, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки и бачок. Вам не взять нас и за 100 тысяч лет.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти волноваги, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your number 11, shove it up your wrinkle bum. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти волноваги, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти волноваги, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти волноваги, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляти волноваги, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Идите нахуй!